Let's continue. If you're new here or lost, you can go to the table of contents. So the introduction to this section on what causes bipolar said there are 5 different factors involved, at least, but these are the really big ones as we understand it now. So now let's look at this one called reward sensitivity. Bottom line is there's a region of the brain in people with bipolar that becomes more active when people are anticipating something good happening. You can imagine if that gets carried away, you could get way too excited about the possibility of something that maybe isn't actually that likely. And this is part of having manic symptoms, but I think also part of the bipolar superpower, the ability to go, wow, cool idea, let's do this, and the determination and energy to pursue it. So exciting is that this region of the brain is within reach of a device called transcranial magnetic stimulation. So we can use that to study it and maybe to treat it. So we'll talk about that further here in this video as well. This research group, led by Dr. Mary Phillips, is one of the main groups that are studying all this. In fact, the rest of this video, which is only just about 5 minutes, will present to you a kind of a summary of Dr. Phillips' team's work um, in plain English. You could go and watch her video on this, which is fantastic, but might be a little too technical. This is an example of one of her slides. You might find it easier to follow if you let me give you a little preview here. By the way, Dr. Phillips is just one of the most gracious scientific leaders, and look at the size of this team. It gives you an idea of what an amazing person she is to be able to pull it all together, including the funding for an operation like this. So what is this reward hypersensitivity or reward sensitivity? And where in the brain is this? And what happens if you damp it down using TMS? Well, so it's about reward. It's like betting. What is your expectation as to what's going to happen here? Can you actually trust this guy? Is that card good enough? How likely do you think you could win this bet? It looks like people with bipolar brains can overestimate that probability, the probability of a good outcome. As Dr. Phillips calls it, she says it's latching on to the possibility of a reward. And so when the probability is low, that means taking a risk. So her team used volunteer participants to go into this MRI machine. This is called functional MRI, where they can actually measure what the brain is doing, not just what it looks like. While people were lying in the scanner, they would play this game, a video game, a card game, where they were invited to predict the value of a card. When they were given extra information that they were likely to win, which generates what's they termed an expectation of reward. That's the key here, an expectation of reward. What does the brain look like when it's expecting a reward? And the result was this. This is such an important region. I'm going to try to walk you through exactly what the name of this thing is so you can remember it. So pardon me while I take a few steps here, showing you the view from the side. This is the wrinkly part. That's the cortex. It's in the front. So this is frontal cortex. This is kind of facing down, what we would call ventral, not dorsal, but ventral, if you will. Viewed from behind, you can see this is out to the side. So this would be the ventrolateral portion of the frontal cortex. And then finally, looking down from the top, you can see that this is way out at the front. In fact, this we would call it prefrontal and on the left. So this is the left ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the left ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. So when people with bipolar are expecting a reward, this region of the brain lights up, becomes more active, even when people are in a depressed phase. This is comparison to depression in blue or healthy controls in yellow there. This region of the brain's activity correlates with impulsivity when you use a standard measure of standard scoring to measure how impulsive people might be. So is there a way to turn this finding into a treatment? Well, this TMS thing, transcranial magnetic stimulation, it's actually kind of a misnomer. It can be used to stimulate a region, or it can be used with pulses at a different frequency, this magnetic field that goes right through into the cortex, right through the bone. At a different frequency, it can be used to damp down activity of neurons in that region just under the surface of the skull. For example, if you put it on the back of your head, brave neurologist one did this when they were just figuring this out. You can use TMS to damp down the activity of the visual cortex and induce a funny kind of blindness that goes away the minute you stop doing this. So using this damping down, certainly we know from years of experience now that TMS is very safe, almost completely so. And so using volunteers, Dr. Phillips' team proceeded to use that damping down frequency to change that activity in the left ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, the results are tricky, not exactly what they anticipated, but actually stimulating a new idea that they're just pursuing now. In fact, we had Dr. Phillips on our podcast, the Brainstorm the Film podcast. She is such a lovely person in terms of her willingness to share her knowledge. And she was very excited to um, telling us, this is just a couple weeks ago, that they have new findings they haven't published yet. They're not peer reviewed yet. So this is not for, they don't release these to the public yet. She's very excited. It sounded like they really think they've got this figured out. What causes bipolar? Major piece of that puzzle is in their hands now, at least to listen to Dr. Phillips. There are other research teams working on this. This is a French group, and their results don't exactly line up, so there's much more to learn yet. But because TMS is safe, obviously people are going to start thinking about using this as some kind of a treatment, like for an emerging manic episode. Unfortunately, it's highly technical and it costs a lot of money to just do one set of treatments with this thing. So I want to point out to you that there is a treatment that's already been studied in a randomized trial that only costs $10 that is also similarly potentially anti-manic. We have more data to suggest that it actually works, and it too is super safe, almost completely safe. Um, Only one person in the randomized trial got depressed using this coming out of a manic episode, and so they just stopped using these amber lenses, and he recovered very quickly, like within a day or two. So other than that, we think completely safe, cheap, and let me just show you the results from that randomized trial. Um, I've described these in a separate video on this channel called Dark Therapy, and I'll send you on a link to that in just a moment when we summarize here. But this result was so stunning. So if someone started thinking about using like a treatment for this hyperactive ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, I think the place to start would be something like dark therapy using amber lenses, not the TMS just yet. So in summary, we have our hands now, thanks to Dr. Phillips and her team and other research groups like it. Um, I think we have our hands on one of the root causes of bipolarity. What Dr. Phillips says, latching on to the possibility of a good outcome. And it's localized to the left ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. And there is a chance to figure out how to use this as part of a treatment. So, to summarize, I just want to remind you that this is not like abnormal. This is just the way bipolar brains are different. This could be part of why people with bipolarity have such amazing capacities for creativity and drive and entrepreneurship and accomplishment, as well as vulnerability to hypomania and mania. So from here, you can go to that dark therapy video I just mentioned, or to the playlist, the What Causes Bipolar playlist, back to that, or to the table of contents.